All right, Algebra 1, welcome back. We are in Section 6 today. So Chapter 10, Section 6, this is all about solving quadratics, a new method by completing the square. So it's kind of nice. We're pulling away a little bit from graphing. This is all algebraic. So this is another method that you could use to solve quadratics. And you know that quadratics, they're just polynomials that have x squared in them. Okay, so that's what designates a polynomial that is a quadratic. Okay, so just in case you didn't know that. So this is another method. Things that we've already learned is factoring. So remember, we've done factoring. We did it in the last chapter. That doesn't disappear. So you can still use factoring in this chapter. And I believe it's in the next section. You can also still use factoring, but in the next section, you're going to learn another method. So there's just multiple methods that you're learning, but I want to give you the heads up, though, that when it comes time for your test, it's not to say that you have to use every method. You're just learning a lot of different methods throughout this chapter. So what I want you to do, or at least start thinking about, is when it comes time for that test, and we're getting close to the end of this chapter, pick a method that you are really, really comfortable with, okay? So I'm going to tell you this again in the next section because you're going to learn another valuable method that you can use. All right, so let's learn this one right here, completing the square. All right, so when you use completing the square, let's zoom in here. Here's your format, all right? That's always your standard format, x squared plus bx plus c, where you're going to have a number that's b, you're going to have a number that's c. But for these problems, the value of c, which is the constant c, all right, that is not going to create a perfect square trinomial. You will be creating the value of c that makes the trinomial a perfect square. Okay, so how do we do that? For starters, if there's a c value, you're going to move it over away, get it on the other side of the equal sign, and then you're going to use this new equation right here. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit. This right here is the new equation where you're going to take the value of b divided by 2, figure that out, then square that answer. That, for starters, is always going to create a positive value, because anytime you square a number, it always creates a positive value. Now, if you look over here and you see this x plus, and then we're going to be looking at that again, that is the c value that they moved over. Okay, so you're gonna see me do a couple examples where we're solving for c, and then an example where we use everything. All right, but this is really important right here. b divided by 2, take that quantity, and then you square it. All right, so let's take a look at an example problem where they're going to say find c. All right, so this is what you're given. This is the important piece right here, x squared plus 5x plus c. So you have to write down what's highlighted. That's going to be the important part here for the example problem. All right, so x squared plus 5x plus c. We don't know what c is. We have to create c so that it becomes a perfect square. So the b value is 5. That's why you have a 5 right here. You're going to use the equation b divided by 2, that quantity, and square it. So that's what they're doing right here. Here's b divided by 2, that quantity, squared. You'll notice, though, that 5 over 2 can't be reduced. It does not equal the perfect number, but you still square it. It doesn't matter. So when you square 5, you get 25. When you square 2, you get 4. Take this value right here, plug it in where you have that c value, and that's what they're doing right here. Okay, so this becomes your brand new trinomial that is a perfect square. And now that you have a perfect square, you can factor it. And that's what they're doing right here. All right, so they are factoring that perfect square. You have a plus sign and a plus sign, so that's going to put a plus here. X squared is perfect. 25 over 4 is perfect because you just created that. All right, and notice what happens. It drops right back down to become 5 over 2. And then that whole binomial, remember this goes back to the last chapter, that binomial is squared, all right, brought to the second power. Okay, here's a little note that I've highlighted there. When you're completing the square, if they give you a C value and that C value is not perfect, move it to the other side. Move it across the equal sign, all right? Then create a brand new C value. That's right here. And how do we do that? By using this new equation, b divided by 2, that quantity squared. All right, so as it says, let's follow these example problems closely. Okay, we're going to do 3, so let's jump into it. All right, first one, find the value of C, then factor it. They didn't give us C, so we have to solve for C. All right, so here's that equation again, b divided by 2. Take that quantity and square it. So what is my b value? It's 8. 8 is my b value. So 8 divided by 2, that quantity squared. What does that equal? That equals 4 squared. What does that equal? 16. Okay, so that's my new C value. Let's make sure we know that. That's my new C value. Now plug that back into the trinomial because now it's a perfect square trinomial. So we now have x squared plus 8x plus 16. I always want to make sure you understand that new C value is always plus. So that's plus and then 16. Now we have to factor it. And this one, it's going to be binomial squared because perfect square trinomials are always the binomial, then squared. All right, notice we have plus sign, plus sign. That means we're going to have a plus sign here. X squared is perfect. That makes x. Then 16 is perfect. That makes 4. And this is what we need. We need this, and we need this also. Okay, so it says the value of C, that's 16, then factor it. That's the x plus 4 quantity squared. All right, let's do it again one more time here. So this one, our b value is 3. All right, b value is 3. And then divide by 2. So 3 over 2 quantity squared. All right, you should notice something. 3 over 2, that can't go anywhere. That's a fraction that can't be reduced. It's not a perfect number, but we can still square it, and we can still make a perfect square trinomial. So that means that that 2 is going to go with both of these numbers. So this is how you should think of it. 3 squared over 2 squared equals 9 over 4. That is your brand new C value. Okay, you squared both parts of the fraction. So let's rewrite the trinomial, but we will substitute in that new C value. All right, so x squared plus 3x plus 9 over 4. That is our brand new trinomial. Now we just need to factor that. All right, so how does that factor? Binomial squared. Notice both plus signs in that trinomial, so we put a plus sign in our binomial. X squared is perfect. It makes x. 9 over 4 is perfect. It makes 3 over 2. All right, there we go. And there we go, right there. Okay, you should notice something. There's a little bit of a pattern here. These values are what we will use in the binomial, but the value of c is always taking those values and squaring them. All right, so that's the connection, the relationship between those two. All right, let's do another one. This last one, though, we're going to walk through the whole process because 8 does not make a perfect square trinomial. All right, 8 does not make a perfect square trinomial. So that means that I have to take the given c value and move it over. All right, so this 8 is going to move over to the other side. And this is what it's going to look like. X squared plus 10x. I'm going to put a plus sign, and then I'm going to put a blank because we have to fill in that blank. Okay? Equals a negative 8. How did I get that? Because I took a positive 8, I moved it across the equal sign, it became a negative 8. Then I'm going to put plus and another blank. Here's why. Because when you're completing the square, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. And in this case, we moved that 8 over, and that 8 has to be dealt with from a brand new c value. Okay, so let's find the brand new c value. How do we do that again? b over 2 quantity squared. All right, so b in this case is 10 divided by 2 quantity squared. That makes 5 squared. That makes 25. So that's what my c value is. That's what I'm going to put in right there. And that's what I'm going to put in right there. So let's fill in those blanks with 25. Okay, fill in those blanks with 25. Now we need to proceed a little bit further. We do have a perfect square trinomial, right? This is now our perfect square trinomial. We can factor that. All right, so let's go ahead and factor that perfect square trinomial. That will create a binomial x plus 5 quantity squared equals a negative 8 plus 25, which is 17. Okay? Now, that right there, we can solve. We can go further into this problem. Okay? Let's think about it. How do we get rid of a square? How do we get rid of a square? By taking the square root. So we must take the square root of both sides. What's this going to do? Cross out the square root with the square, leaving us with x plus 5 equals the square root of 17. I'll tell you right now, 17 is not a perfect number. Leave it. It's also a prime number. That's why you're leaving it and not actually breaking it down and simplifying a radical. You're leaving it as the square root of 17. And we got one more step here. We have to take this 5 and bring it over so that we determine what is x. We're solving for x. What is x? All right, so when you bring it over, that is going to be rewritten as x equals negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 17. All right, now don't forget, why do we do the plus or minus right here? We do the plus or minus because whatever the square root of 17 is, and trust me, it's not a nice number, you still have to represent both the positive and the negative version of that. Okay, that covers all 3 example problems. Make sure that you bring your questions to class, okay? I am betting, as we zoom out, that the first two example problems, not too bad, solving for C, but the third one involved all of the possible steps for solving for X that there are. So walk through this video again if you need it, or maybe just walk through example 3 again if you need that one. Copy down all the info that you have there for the example problems, plus the info that we have up here for the notes. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one.